This might be the best home schedule in the history of Georgia football, but tonight I'm going to talk to you about the 5 brutal truths about the 2025 Georgia football schedule that maybe you haven't considered just yet. Let's dive into it on this edition of the How About That DawgsCast. We could say that there's a lot going on as we get into the 25 season, but we already know that. We've already talked about that. Tonight, what I want to talk about are the things that maybe don't jump out at you when you look at the schedule for 2025 at first glance. One of the brutal truths that I wanted to remind everybody about if you're in Dog Nation is the fact that Tennessee not only hits Georgia's schedule earlier in the year, but it's also the Dogs' first SEC game. And oh, by the way, yes, they get to have the opportunity to get a couple of games under their belt at home, break in a new quarterback, as it were. And yes, I know that over the last 8 times that Georgia has played Tennessee, they've stuffed them in a locker. It didn't matter who the head coach was. It didn't matter where they played. It seems like that thing that happened back in 2016, that fluky ending that gave Tennessee their last victory against Georgia, it seems like that sticks in Kirby's craw, and he's made it his personal mission to ruin life on Rocky Top for the last several years, as you can see here, and it hasn't even been close. Even in the years when people thought that this game was going to be more competitive, Kirby and the boys just said there's going to be none of that. And they have put their boot on Tennessee's neck consistently for the last few seasons. Now, as a Georgia fan, that's all fine and good and great. But here we are rolling into 2025 where not only is it their first SEC game, but it's their first SEC road game. So you have this young team, you have this new quarterback starter, and what happens? They have to break all that in on the road in the SEC to open league play. I understand. Nico's not there anymore, and a lot of people would be sad about that because they thought him being there maybe somehow gave Georgia a better chance to win. I'm not on that team, but the thing about it is that last year, going into the game, I said that that was Heupel's best Tennessee team. And Georgia went right out there and handled business 31-17. It took them a minute to get going, but once they got everything rolling, they kind of handled their business, unleashed the tight ends against Tennessee, and took that game over. And of course, that game was at home, and we all know how good Georgia's been at home recently. But this one's on the road. But Heupel has been building. He has been recruiting better. So they may not be the best team that Heupel's had so far just because of the fact that they're going to have to break in a new quarterback. But this is not a Tennessee team that's void of talent. They are going to be at home. They are going to have good players, and they are going to want to snap this streak, this 8-year losing streak to the University of Georgia. If I needed to add anything else to it, I did tell you, didn't I? This is their first SEC road game. And yeah, they do have a new quarterback that's going to be taking snaps. Do we all remember what happened the last time Georgia had to do that? Going into a known hostile environment on the road to open SEC play? Just in case you don't remember, I'm here to help you. That's my job. Let's think back to 2023. It was another first-time starting quarterback, Carson Beck, who had to go on the road to Auburn for his first SEC game. That was a little hairy. If it hadn't been for the heroics of one Brock Bowers, then frankly, the Dogs probably would have taken an L that day. All you have to do, if you don't believe that the first trip of the season to play an SEC road game is going to be difficult for Georgia with a new starting quarterback, just think back to what happened the last time Georgia went on the road with a first-time starting quarterback for their opening in league play, right? If it hadn't been for 19, if Superman hadn't put on his cape that day, the Dogs would have absolutely come out of Auburn with a loss. But it was because of players like Brock Bowers and the other players that wound up making a difference, Malachi Starks at the end of the game with the interception, that the Dogs were able to escape the Plains that day with a win. It is never easy on the road in the SEC, and it certainly isn't easy at places like Knoxville or on the road at Auburn. But because Brock Bowers is superhuman, a robot, he just decided Georgia was not going to lose that day. They fed the ball to him, and they came out of there with a win. The question is, who's going to be that Brock Bowers for Georgia here in 2025? Who's going to be the player or players that step up and make a difference when Georgia really has to have it on the road in a tough environment like on Rocky Top playing Tennessee? Who is going to be Brock Bowers for the Georgia Bulldogs this year? That's a brutal truth in this game and in every game for Georgia. When you look at the 2025 season, they're young. Yes, they've got guys that have played. People in the comments last week mentioned that they've got guys that have played. Georgia's not a young team. I stand by the fact that this is a young team because the starters aren't the only ones that play. The depth pieces also play in the way Georgia plays the game of football. Those guys absolutely are young, and they are going to be going out there under the bright lights of Neyland for the first time as starters. And it's going to be a tough environment for them to play in. So who's going to be that person or that group of people that's going to step up and lead Georgia when it gets tough like that? And they have to have somebody come through for them. Back in 2023, it was a burgeoning Carson Beck, who I personally thought could handle it. But I had warned of that game in the spring prior. And I said, watch out. That one could step up and get Georgia. And if it hadn't been for Brock Bowers, that would have happened. So now it's Tennessee. Georgia had better beware. There's going to come a point in that game where somebody's going to have to make a play that's going to be a dictating factor in how the game turns out. In 2023, for Carson Beck and that Georgia Bulldogs team that was on the ropes down in Auburn, it was Brock Bowers, the two-time Mackey Award winner, the three-time All-American, the two-time national champion, a guy that's statue-worthy, a guy that's Mount Rushmore-worthy. Who on this team for Georgia right now, who on this roster are you going to turn to when the going gets tough on the road at Knoxville? We're all going to learn that together. Obviously, history's on their side. Georgia should be favored to win that game. I expect that Georgia will, but it's not going to come without us learning some things about this Georgia football team. So it's exciting, and it's also a little scary. Now, the second brutal truth that I want to get to tonight is not so much about fear, but more about just acknowledging reality. And that is that the University of Georgia, for whatever reason, has just had a very difficult time with the University of Alabama recently, at least in recent memory. It doesn't matter what the stage is, although they seem to only match up when the lights are the brightest. Alabama always seems to play their best when they play Georgia. And even though they didn't sniff the SEC championship last year, they wound up beating the team that was ultimately the champions of the league. I, going into that game, said, yeah, Georgia's got to put it on the line. They've got to prove it. But I thought Georgia was going to get it done, and they damn near did. But they didn't. And then you just have to wonder, is it in their head? For whatever reason, Georgia struggles. This is going to be a tough football game. Regardless of who's starting at quarterback for Alabama or Georgia, regardless of what happens in the first three games, Georgia could roll into that game 3-0, have them at home, and still, I don't know a Georgia fan that's not going to be sweating the outcome of that thing. I lived this in the 90s with Florida and Steve Spurrier. I love to hate Steve Spurrier, but I respect that man as a head coach because of the way he viewed the Georgia game, the priority he put on it, and the way his teams played when Georgia played them. And after a while, it turned into more of a mental thing for Georgia, and they just couldn't get over the hump. Yeah, well, that's kind of how this feels. The only difference is Georgia doesn't play Alabama every year, or at least they haven't in the recent memory. But when they did play, everything was on the line. Thousands, millions of eyeballs are watching, and time and again, Georgia seems to stub their toe. So here's the other part of this. Kalen DeBoer last year was new at Alabama. So a lot of people said, if you're going to get him, you better get him then. Georgia didn't get him. Now, granted, Alabama didn't win the title. Georgia wears the crown. The SEC runs through Athens. But now we head into year 2 under Kalen DeBoer. And I've heard different Alabama fans say different things. Some people think that they love everything that they're hearing now at Tuscaloosa these days, and they fully believe that Alabama's going to go out there and win the conference this year. On the other spectrum, nobody's calling for Alabama to have a down year. Of course not. Alabama's talented. They're going to be a good team. We know their history. We know Georgia struggles with them. Even on the soft end of things, Alabama fans seem to think that this is going to be, at minimum, a 10-win team, and they're going to make the college football playoff. So again, I'll tell you, Georgia can roll into that game 3-0. you have to look at this and admit the brutal truth, which is that Georgia fans will be sweating come the end of September when Alabama rolls to town, even if it looks for all the world like we have the better team. But this is that first opportunity in one of these games where all the momentum, power, strength, and fury that Sanford Stadium has come to embody under Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs has its first opportunity to really come out in full throat and show its force, show that Sanford Stadium is a difficult place to play, and put the hurt on Alabama. So here we are all these months out. So I'm going to go ahead and issue that challenge to Dog Nation and Georgia football fans everywhere and tell you that if you want to get up for a game, this is the one to get up for. You want to make your presence felt. Think Tennessee in 2022. You want that kind of experience in the stadium. This is the game to break it out, because it's going to take everything that Georgia can muster. I've already talked about how young they are. I've talked about the quarterback. I've talked about all the things that are going to make it difficult for Georgia to get up to speed early in the year. The thing I haven't really talked about is the fan base. And this is a game where they can make a difference. So this is the moment I'm going to go ahead and start beating the drum. Dog Nation, you need to show up and help your team, because the brutal truth is that Alabama is a very tough game for Georgia to win in 2025. I will not be surprised if Alabama wins again. Moving along, I think the next game we have to point to, and I know we were just talking about them, but the brutal truth number 3 that you must acknowledge, even in a household like mine, where we're in no way a house divided, but yours truly hates Florida in a way that is unrivaled when it comes to my Georgia football fandom. But the other side of my house, well, we're divided a little bit, because Mrs. Beast, she looks at Georgia football and the one team that draws her ire more than any other, the Auburn War Tiger Plainsmen. Oh, the Auburn Tigers. Everybody hates Auburn. If you're a Georgia fan, they're one of the classic historic rivals of the program. Even though Auburn has been on tough times, it's still Auburn. And more than that, it's at Auburn. Even if you think Auburn's going to be a walkover game, if I tell you the game is at Auburn, then you are going to go, ooh. Well, most dog fans I know are going to go, ooh, that's weird. They've got those UFO spaceships, buried under the 50-yard line. Weird stuff happens over there. We've all seen it. Georgia fans, Alabama fans, they know the deal. Weird stuff happens when you have to go on the plains. Need I say more than at Auburn? They do pageantry right. And when that stadium is in full throat, there really aren't many environments like it. A big game at Jordan-Hare, it rivals any stage in the SEC as far as pageantry and how the fans can affect the game. We've all seen it before. All we have to do is look back to what happened in 2023. Georgia went in there highly ranked and barely escaped alive. We've seen Georgia go in as the number 1 team in the country and get dog walked. We've seen Georgia go in as double-digit underdogs and come out with a huge upset win. You never know what's going to happen when you go on the plains to face the Tigers, and those fans will absolutely have an outcome in the game. Does Georgia have what it takes to go in there and shut them up early and get out of there with a win? That's what makes this game tough. That's what always makes this game tough. It is going to be a challenging game. If it's not, I will be the first one to come on here and tell you, man, I got that wrong. I didn't see that coming. But I just fully expect that every time Georgia has to go down and play at Jordan-Hare with the UFO spaceships buried under the 50-yard line and all the weirdness that goes on down there, the Indian burial grounds and everything else, it's tough. It's weird. And you just may as well admit the fact that it's going to be an interesting ride every time the Dogs have to go on the road to play the Tigers. Wait. I'll get right back to the show. But I want to take this opportunity to let you know about the Ring the Bell newsletter. Each week, I break down the mindset, strategy, and culture behind Georgia's football dominance. But of course, that's not all. You'll also get exclusive podcast updates and episodes. You'll get deep dives about Kirby Smart and Georgia football, real-world lessons on leadership, content strategy, and growth, stories from the sidelines and the press box, and first looks at new content, free resources, and community drops. Not to mention my top hitters on social media every week. And oh yeah, there's the discounts. So are you in? Be the first to know. Be a part of the team, join the program, and sign up for the Ring the Bell newsletter in the description down below. This is not just a newsletter, it's a movement for dogs who lead. And that brings us to the team that I hate like no other, the Florida Gators, an annual matchup in Jacksonville. There are a lot of firsts that are happening here for Georgia. There are a lot of firsts when it comes to this team and where they have to go and what they have to do. But all you have to do is think back on the history of the Georgia-Florida series. Georgia hates Florida, Florida hates Georgia. And even back in the 90s, I mentioned it earlier, that's why Spurrier had such a spur in his saddle for getting after the Dogs every opportunity he had, twisting the knife whenever he could. He hung 50 on them in Sanford Stadium. Well, we're not playing home and home here. We're headed down to Jacksonville. But the Gators, they're believing in themselves. They got themselves a quarterback down there by the name of DJ Lagway, who a lot of people want to say, if he didn't get hurt last year, the Gators might have won that game. They might have beat Georgia. Now, I'm not going to go that far, but one thing's for sure, DJ Lagway looks like a good player. He looks like a good dude, too. And it's kind of hard to root against a good dude who's talented, but I'll manage. Don't worry. It's the Florida Gators after all. Going back to going on the road to play your first SEC game at Knoxville and then making your first trip to Auburn if you're Gunnar Stockton as the starting quarterback. Well, now you're going to go down and play in Georgia's biggest rivalry game at a neutral site where it's just loud all the time. And oh, by the way, you're taking that young team with you. That's what Gunnar Stockton has on his plate here. And again, I'm just going to ride with the fact that I think he's the guy. But even if he's not, it doesn't matter. And the stakes would be even higher if it were Ryan Puglisi who was having to make this start against Florida. Florida, yes, they have not recruited the way Georgia has, but they have not recruited that badly either. And when you've got a player like Lagway on your team who stresses the defense in multiple ways, it can make for a long day. So even though someone like me might not want to hear it, even though someone like me who just wants to put Florida on a secondary level and keep them there, I have to admit that this trip to Jacksonville, the brutal truth is, it's going to be a dangerous trip for Georgia. It's going to be a dangerous trip. Georgia should be favored. Georgia should win the game. But if you're old enough to remember the Steve Spurrier days, you're old enough to understand that Georgia should do any of those things against Florida. Well, that's just not something you can put in the bank. And it doesn't matter who the head coach is. They've got a pretty good head coach right now. At least the Florida fans seem to think so at the moment. In Billy Napier, they think that they've rode out the hard part and now they're on the ascension, right? They're on the upswing. They've got it rolling. They've got their quarterback. They've got a talented defense. They think they've got it cooking down in Jacksonville. Maybe, maybe not, but I am never going to underestimate the Florida Gators when they play my Georgia Bulldogs. It's going to be dangerous. And that's just a brutal truth that I'm going to have to acknowledge this year, even though I don't feel super comfortable doing it. That's 4. I promised you 5. The 5th brutal truth is that the University of Georgia, despite the fathering of the Texas Longhorns that they did in 2024, are still going to have to contend with a program that is talented, is hungry, and is eager to prove that they belong here in the SEC and that they can compete with and beat Georgia. They haven't been able to do it so far. 2-time losers. But to discount them as anything other than a threat or a contender for the league championship in 2025 would be a mistake. The difference going into this season, the big difference, as evidenced maybe by what we saw at the NFL draft this past weekend, is that you don't have Quinn Ewers playing quarterback for Texas here in 2025. If everything goes according to plan for the Longhorns, that's going to be one Arch Manning. The same Arch Manning that Georgia recruited, wanted to have come play for them, but he chose to go play for Sarkisian out there on the 40 acres. And that is what it is. Everybody makes their choices, and so far, Arch and the boys have come up 0-2 against the red and black of my Georgia Bulldogs. This is Georgia's best home schedule, potentially, in the history of the program. So I'm going to reach back, and I'm going to say that this is another one of those games where Texas gets introduced to what road life is like in the SEC. Because yeah, they had a decent year last year, but they didn't really have to go in and navigate that many difficult road environments last season. But when Gunner and the boys welcomed them into Athens, just like when Alabama comes rolling in there earlier in the year, and when Ole Miss follows them, by the way, that place is going to be full throat. Sanford Stadium is going to be electric. And Texas and Arch, they're going to get everything that Georgia has to offer. Because now, whether it's right or not, and you would hear me argue that it's not right, Georgia fans are starting to feel like they got a little something on Texas, that they're sort of in Texas' head a little bit. Maybe, maybe not. I'm not a Texas fan, and I'm not dare going to speak for the Longhorns. But the one thing I know, keeping it straight, is that Georgia is going to have every opportunity to win this game. But I also know that Texas is talented. And I know that this is another one of those games where the fans can really sort of dictate how it's going to go in the end. I, for one, am super excited about that. So on that side of the ledger, I'm very, very happy that Georgia gets to welcome in Texas. They've got that in their back pocket. Home field didn't help Texas very much last year, though. Would we see that in Athens this year? I don't know. But the brutal truth is, this game is going to be a challenge for the Georgia Bulldogs. They have a superstar, they believe, at quarterback. They are as talented as anybody in the country, according to most rankings out there. And they've had a flavor of what it's like to play Georgia a couple of times now. So it's not like they're going to be caught off guard. This is going to be a very difficult game for Georgia. And when you sit back and look across the schedule and you start to think about predicting how the season might play out for the Dogs, you cannot look at any of these 5 games, and especially this Texas game, and think, yeah, that's a win without even consideration. That's the brutal truth. That's why I wanted to talk about these games tonight. That's why I wanted to say, yes, Georgia might have a young starting quarterback taking over. And these games are not games that are happening in 2021 with that loaded defense, or in 2022 with that offense led by Stetson Bennett that was putting up over 40 points a game. This is a different group, and they're going to have to go out there and earn it. And the brutal truth is that if they get through this season with 9 wins, 10 wins or more, and they're in contention for a trip back to Atlanta to play for the SEC championship, then they will have absolutely earned it. Because you can't point at any of these games and say, well, that team's garbage or that team's trash and that's a walkover. It's just not. The most casual fans might say that, and they're going to expose themselves for being ignorant of the sport when they do. Because when you look at everything that's tied into it, the circumstances around it, and I'm talking about the circumstances as we sit here in spring. These are the things we can see coming. We don't even know what's going to happen between now and then. Who may or may not be hurt? Who may or may not actually be the starter at quarterback for Georgia? The starter at safety for Georgia? We don't know. And all these other teams have their own questions too. But that's what makes the 2025 season so exciting, is there's so much out here that the Dogs are going to have to navigate. And there were other games. I've seen it. I've thought about it. But these were my top 5. Ole Miss, yeah, it's going to be a challenge. Georgia Tech, absolutely. They took Georgia to the wire last year. It's going to be a rough run. If the Dogs can get down to the end and still be in contention, it will be a season worth celebrating. And it's partly the reason I love football so much in the first place, because it's seasons like this where we have to go watch the team grow, learn, mature, and improve as they move along. That's the kind of season that really just sort of gets me going as a college football fan. And Gunner Stockton and the rest of those Georgia Bulldogs have their work cut out for them, because the brutal truth is this season's going to be a tough one. It's going to be fun, but it's going to be a tough one. The Georgia Bulldogs are going to have a very tough schedule in 2025. It's an awesome schedule on paper, the best home schedule in the history of the program, to hear some people say it. But when you look outside what's on the home schedule, you quickly come to understand that this schedule might not be as tough as it was last year, but it's certainly no cakewalk. And if the Dogs can navigate it and compete at a level to get the victories, to put themselves in position to be in contention to get back to Atlanta at the end of the year, this will be one of Kirby Smart's best coaching jobs, because he will have recruited at such a level that even though you and I might not know it right now, we might not feel comfortable with thinking about this team as a plug-and-play team. He and his coaching staff know what they have on the roster. And if they put in the work and coach them up the way they're supposed to, there are no injuries or anything like that, which is part of the game. But if you get through virtually unscathed, and this team can come together in the way that some of the past championship teams have done for Georgia, then at the end of the year, they will absolutely have every opportunity to be right there competing for another championship. But it will be in consideration, in my opinion, as one of Kirby Smart's best coaching jobs in Athens. Go Dogs!
Told him, how about them fucking dogs? That's what I told him.